Hello, OT friends, and welcome to the Uncommon OT series. I'm Patricia Modis, and I'm your host, a Filipino-American, native New Yorker, currently based in Los Angeles, bulldog mama, and an uncommon occupational therapist myself for the past 22 years. On this podcast, you will hear me proudly feature the unique careers of occupational therapy practitioners working in non-traditional and role-emerging practice areas, settings where OT is uncommon. I invite you to receive a dose of OT inspiration, to learn, to think outside of the box, and to be energized and motivated to follow in these unconventional paths. Happy listening.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Uncommon OT Series podcast. I'm your host, Patricia Modis, and today's episode is a very special one because we are celebrating the 5-year anniversary of the Uncommon OT Series. 5 years. It is honestly hard for me to believe that I have been sitting behind this microphone, having these conversations, highlighting uncommon occupational therapy roles, and building this community for 5 years. When I started this podcast, I did not have a 5-year plan. I did not know exactly where it would lead, how it would grow, and how much it would become connected to my own professional journey. I simply knew that there were occupational therapists doing incredible work outside of the roles and settings we hear about most often, and I wanted to create a space where their stories could be heard. I wanted occupational therapy students and practitioners to understand that our profession is much broader than any one setting, any one title, or traditional career path. Now, occupational therapy can show up in hospitals and schools, in community programs, homeless services, wellness spaces, entrepreneurship, advocacy, education, leadership, media, public health, and so many other areas. And sometimes we just need to see someone else doing the work before we can imagine ourselves doing it too. So that has always been at the heart of this podcast. And today, I want to reflect on the past 5 years, share what has happened in my own uncommon OT journey since last August, and give everyone an update on my post-professional occupational therapy doctorate journey, including talking about where the podcast is now and share a little about what may be coming next. So there's been a lot happening, so let's get into it. When I began the Uncommon OT series during the pandemic, so much of the world felt uncertain. Many of us were rethinking how we worked, how we connected, and how we wanted to contribute to the profession. At this point, I had already spent many years working in community-based and non-traditional occupational therapy roles, but I continued to notice that these roles were not always visible. There were OT practitioners creating programs, working with underserved communities, starting businesses, using creative approaches, and bringing OT into spaces where it had not previously existed, but their stories were not always being told. The podcast became one way to help change that. It gave me an opportunity to sit down with occupational therapy practitioners and other professionals and ask questions such as, how did you discover this role? How did you explain the value of occupational therapy? And what OT skills helped you succeed? What challenges did you experience? And what advice would you give another OT who wants to create a less traditional career? Now, over the past 5 years, I've had the privilege of interviewing occupational therapy practitioners working across so many different areas. We have talked about community engagement, home organization, entrepreneurship, mental health, integrative health, writing and copywriting, program development, advocacy, leadership, education, and many other possibilities within the profession. Each guest has reminded us that there is no single way to be an occupational therapist. And that message has become even more important to me over time. We need occupational therapy practitioners in traditional clinical settings, but we also need OT practitioners who are willing to step into new spaces, identify unmet needs, create programs, advocate for occupational justice, and explain how our perspective can contribute. Sometimes being an uncommon OT means taking a position that already exists and just approaching it differently. Sometimes it means creating a role where there was no occupational therapist before. And sometimes it means combining occupational therapy with another interest, skill, or lived experience. And sometimes it means giving yourself permission to make a change even when the next step is not completely clear. Now, many of you know that my own career has not followed one straight path. I began in more traditional mental health settings, including psychiatry and intensive psychiatric rehabilitation. Those experiences gave me a strong clinical foundation. But I gradually found myself drawn towards community-based practice. I wanted to work with people in the environments where they were actually living, rebuilding, learning, reconnecting, and trying to move forward. That led me into work with survivors of domestic violence, individuals living with HIV and AIDS, people experiencing homelessness, and community organizations where occupational therapy was not always fully understood or established. In several of those settings, I had the opportunity to develop occupational therapy programming where no formal OT program had existed before. Now, that work required flexibility. It required me to explain what OT was, identify the needs of the organization and community and population, build relationships with staff, and demonstrate how occupational therapy perspective could support the larger mission. Now, it was not always easy, but it helped me understand the power of our profession. It also taught me that many of the skills we develop as occupational therapy practitioners are transferable. We know how to analyze activities, routines, habits, environments, roles, barriers, and supports. We understand that health is connected to participation, identity, belonging, and access to meaningful occupations. And those skills can be used in many more places than we sometimes realize. Now, alongside all of these new opportunities, I'm still working full-time as the occupational therapist and activities coordinator at Safe Landing, an interim housing facility serving adults who have experienced homelessness in Los Angeles. And this role continues to keep me grounded in direct practice and really reminds me why occupational therapy is so valuable in community-based settings. Now, no 2 days look exactly the same. My work may include developing and facilitating groups, along with my interns, supporting daily routines, identifying cognitive and functional barriers, encouraging community participation, and collaborating with case managers and other mental health professionals, providing staff education, and really helping our participants reconnect with meaningful roles and activities. Now, working in interim housing also requires creativity and flexibility. People arrive with various histories, strengths, priorities, health concerns, trauma experiences, and various levels of readiness. And occupational therapy gives me a way to look beyond a diagnosis or a housing status and rather ask what this person needs in order to be able to participate more fully in daily life. Like, what routines have been disrupted? What environments are helping or creating barriers? And what skills, interests, or roles can we build upon? Now, education and mentorship have also remained an important part of my role there. Over the past year, I've supervised 10 plus occupational therapy students, various degrees, and this is something that I'm really proud of. Many students come into this setting with very limited exposure to homelessness services or just non-traditional community-based practice. Now, at first, they may not immediately recognize where occupational therapy OT fits. Then over time, they begin to see the OT lens everywhere. They start noticing routines, executive functioning, health management, communication, leisure, social participation, environmental barriers even, and the impact of trauma and housing instability on everyday occupations. Now, watching students become more confident, creative, and comfortable explaining the value of occupational therapy has been incredibly rewarding over the years. I see fieldwork education as another form of advocacy. Every student who leaves the experience with a broader understanding of what OT can be carries that perspective into the profession moving forward. We've also been expanding our pet parenting program at Safe Landing. This has been a very special part of my year. For many residents at our interim housing facility, a pet is not simply a companion. A pet may be family, emotional support. It may be motivation. It may be responsibility. It may be routine or connection. And sometimes the most consistent relationship a person can have during periods of homelessness or loss. And the program that we've created really allows us to think more intentionally about how to support residents in caring for their pets, while also addressing education, access to resources, health, safety, daily routines, and the human-animal bond. So I'm super excited about the possibilities for this program and the ways that it can continue to grow. Now, I give you this example because these parts of my work may not always be as visible as an award or a conference or some kind of invitation to speak, but they remain at the center of my uncommon OT career. They allow me to continue practicing, teaching, creating programs, and learning directly from the people and the communities that I serve. One of the most meaningful moments of the past year was receiving the Occupational Therapy Association of California's Media Award. Now, receiving the OTAC Media Award for work connected to the Uncommon OT series was especially meaningful because this podcast began as a passion project. It started with a microphone, curiosity, and a desire to amplify voices that were not always being represented. So to see that work acknowledged reminded me that media can be a form of advocacy. A podcast can educate. It can challenge assumptions. It can introduce someone to a career path they did not know existed. It can help an occupational therapy practitioner feel less isolated. And it can certainly give students examples of possibilities that may not appear in a textbook or a traditional fieldwork placement. And it can also create a record of many ways our profession is evolving. So the award felt like a recognition not only for my work, but also of the guests who trusted me with their stories and of the community that has continued to listen, share episodes, and support the podcast. It has also encouraged me to keep going. Another major highlight was attending the World Federation of Occupational Therapists gathering in Bangkok, Thailand in February. Being part of an international occupational therapy gathering was incredibly energizing. It reminded me that although our healthcare systems, communities, resources, and professional structures might differ, occupational therapy practitioners around the world are addressing many of the same larger issues. We're thinking about access, we're thinking about participation, inclusion, displacement, trauma, disability, aging, mental health, community health, and occupational justice. One of the most meaningful parts of the experience was meeting many previous podcast guests in person for the very first time. These were people I had spent time interviewing and getting to know through virtual conversations, and sometimes from completely different parts of the world. Now, to finally meet them face to face, spend time together, and connect beyond the computer screen was really special. It made me realize that the podcast has created more than a collection of episodes. It has really created relationships. It has created a network of people who are passionate about expanding the reach of occupational therapy. And it has helped connect practitioners who may never otherwise have had the opportunity to meet. Now, that experience brought the podcast full circle for me. Conversations that began online became real-life professional connections and friendships in Bangkok. I absolutely loved it. The AOTA Annual Conference in Anaheim was another important experience this year. This conference was different for me because I participated in a booth capacity working with SnapSlide to help promote their product. Now, that was another uncommon OT role for me and another example of how occupational therapy skills can translate into settings that may not initially look like clinical practice. Now, working at the booth involved communication, education, relationship building, understanding the needs of potential users, and helping people see how a product may support participation or practice. It was so exciting to experience the conference from that perspective. Although tiring, it helped me to engage with practitioners, students, educators, and leaders throughout the event. The conference was also meaningful because I was recognized along with other uncommon OT practitioners serving on the AOTA ad hoc committee focused on innovative and entrepreneurial practice. I have been part of this committee since last November, and being recognized in person at the conference, having front row seats, really made the experience feel especially significant. An added bonus was that many of the committee members were already part of my podcast community and had previously appeared as guests on the Uncommon OT series. So to be together in person, serving in leadership capacity, and being recognized for our contributions really felt like another full circle moment. These were people whose uncommon career paths I had highlighted through the podcast, and now we're serving together to shape a larger professional conversation about innovation, entrepreneurship, and emerging roles within occupational therapy. I also had the opportunity to meet Dr. Lauer, the program director of my post-professional OTD program at University of Montana. Big shout out to her because she's wonderful. The program is online, and it's really designed for OT practitioners like me who are working full-time. Meeting Dr. Lauer in person at the conference was really very special. I was proud to have her, along with my OT colleagues, witness firsthand some of the leadership roles I've been involved in, including our recognition with the AOTA president. There was something powerful about having the director of my doctoral program see how my academic journey, podcast work, professional service, and leadership experiences were all coming together. And the conference really reminded me that the different areas of my work are not separate at all. My clinical practice, podcasting, education, advocacy, my committee work, and my doctoral studies all inform one another. This might be a great way to segue into the next section, which is my post-professional OTD journey. That has been another major part of this past year. And now I have 2 more semesters to go. Now that feels exciting, a little unbelievable, and if I'm being honest, also a little overwhelming at times. Returning to school while continuing to work full-time, host a podcast, supervise students, participate in professional activities, and manage everyday life has required a great deal of discipline and balance. There have been late nights, weekends spent working on assignments, moments of questioning myself, and certainly moments where I wondered why I had added one more major responsibility to my life. A friend called it an undertaking recently, and I couldn't help but laugh because it sure has been. But the program has also helped me slow down and think more intentionally about my work. It has pushed me to connect my experiences to evidence, to theory, to leadership, advocacy, program development, and knowledge translation. It has also helped me recognize that many of the things I've been doing throughout my career are really connected. Creating programs, teaching staff and students, mentoring others, advocating for non-traditional practice, and sharing knowledge through the podcast are not separate pieces. They are all part of the same larger purpose. And as I move into the final 2 semesters, I'm beginning to explore possible capstone project ideas. One idea I'm considering is the Uncommon OT Toolkit. I do not want to share too much yet because the idea is still developing, but the toolkit would be designed to support OT students and practitioners who are interested in exploring non-traditional, emerging, and community-based roles. The larger goal would be to help people recognize that their transferable OT skills identify where an occupational therapy perspective could add value and feel more prepared to create their own path. Now, the idea connects naturally to the podcast because for 5 years, my guests have been sharing pieces of that roadmap through their stories. So for now, I will leave it there as a teaser. I am still exploring what the capstone will become, and I look forward to sharing more as the idea develops. Another major opportunity coming up is my invitation to deliver the keynote address for the Barbara A. Ryder Colloquium at Western Michigan University this coming October. Now, mind you, this is my very first invitation for a keynote address, and I'm nervous as hell. The theme for my keynote is Bridging Practice and Possibility in Occupational Therapy. Now, this invitation feels deeply personal, and it'll really give me an opportunity to look back at the different stations of my career, from my early education and traditional mental health practice to community-based work to podcasting and to my current work with people experiencing homelessness. I plan to talk transparently about the transitions, unexpected opportunities, setbacks, risks, and relationships that shaped my journey. Now, my career did not unfold according to a perfect plan, as I've shared before. There were layoffs, there were roles I entered without knowing exactly what occupational therapy would look like in that setting. And there were programs that had to be built from the ground up. And there were times when I had to repeatedly explain why occupational therapy belonged at the table. Now, there were also mentors, colleagues, supervisors, students, clients, podcast guests, and community members who helped me recognize what was possible. The keynote will also invite participants to reflect on their own professional journeys. I want students and practitioners to think about the experiences and values and interests and transferable skills they carry with them, what populations they're drawn to, what problems they want to solve, and what settings or communities might benefit from occupational therapy perspective, and what possibilities might become visible if they stop limiting themselves to the roles they've already seen. Now, preparing for this keynote is allowing me to bring together many parts of my life and career. It feels like both a reflection and somewhat of a new beginning. Now, as we celebrate 5 years, the podcast is also continuing to grow. We've now reached more than 100 episodes, which is another milestone I never imagined when I started. Our recent and upcoming conversations continue to focus on community engagement, innovation, leadership, entrepreneurship, and the expanding role of OT. One recent conversation highlights the work of the AOTA Ad Hoc Committee and the importance of supporting innovative and entrepreneurial practitioners. Another focuses on OT and community engagement and the ways OT practitioners can partner with communities rather than simply bringing predetermined services into them. Now, these are the kinds of conversations I want to continue having. The podcast has also grown beyond the audio episodes themselves. Our social media community has expanded significantly and has become one place where students and practitioners can discover guests, exchange ideas, and learn about different career possibilities. I'm also beginning to think more intentionally about newsletters, partnerships, sponsorships, and other ways to make the podcast sustainable. Sustainability matters because producing a podcast requires time, technology, some planning, research, editing, promotion, and really coordination. So for much of the past 5 years, this work has been fueled by passion and personal commitment. So as the platform grows, I want to explore ways to support its continued development while remaining aligned with the mission. So the purpose will always be to elevate uncommon voices, expanding the understanding of occupational therapy, and create meaningful learning opportunities for the occupational therapy community. When I think about the biggest lesson from the past 5 years, it is that you do not need to have the entire path figured out before you begin. You begin with what you know. You pay attention to what matters to you. You stay curious. You build relationships. You listen to the people and communities around you. And then you take the next step. The Uncommon OT series started as one idea during an uncertain time. Now that idea led to more than 100 conversations. Now those conversations have led to relationships, learning, professional opportunities, international connections, an OTAC Media Award, committee involvement, doctoral capstone ideas, and now a keynote invitation. None of that was visible at the beginning. There were also times when I questioned whether I had enough time, whether people were listening, whether the podcast was growing quickly enough, or whether I should continue. But now I know that impact is not always measured by a number. Sometimes impact is one student hearing an episode and realizing that there is a place for them in occupational therapy. Sometimes it is one practitioner deciding to develop a new program. Sometimes it is one guest finally feeling that their work is being recognized. Sometimes it is one conversation that helps someone find the language to explain what they've been trying to create. And those moments matter. I've also learned that leadership does not always begin with a formal title. Leadership can begin by asking a question no one else is asking. It can begin by creating a group, developing a resource, mentoring a student, starting a podcast, volunteering for a committee, or speaking up about a need in your community. The uncommon path is not always the easiest path, but it can be deeply meaningful. I want to end this anniversary episode by saying thank you. Thank you to every guest who trusted me with their story. Thank you to every listener who downloaded an episode, shared it with a colleague, used it in a classroom, or sent me a message. Thank you to the students who have reached out with questions and ideas. Thank you to the 10 plus students I had the privilege of supervising this past year, and to all of the students who have allowed me to be part of their learning journey. Thank you to the occupational therapy practitioners who continue to challenge the boundaries of our profession. And thank you to my colleagues at Safe Landing and to the participants who continue to teach me about resilience, community, participation, and what meaningful occupation looks like in real life. Thank you to the mentors, my colleagues, my friends, my committee members, my podcast guests, my educators, and my supporters who have encouraged me to keep going. And thank you to the people and communities I have worked with throughout my career. They have taught me that occupational therapy is not only about what we do. It is about how we listen, how we collaborate, how we recognize possibility, and how we support people in participating in their lives in communities. Now, 5 years ago, I started the Uncommon OT series because I believed that these stories needed a platform. 5 years later, I believe that more strongly than ever. There are still so many stories to tell. There are still so many roles to explore. And there are still many opportunities for occupational therapy practitioners to enter spaces where our perspective is needed. As I move through the final 2 semesters of my doctorate, explore ideas for the Uncommon OT Toolkit, expand various programs at Safe Landing, continue supervising students, prepare for the Barbara A. Ryder Colloquium, continue my committee work, and begin the next chapter of this podcast, I hope you will continue on this journey with me. I would also love to hear from you. What has been your favorite episode or guest from the past 5 years? Has the podcast influenced the way you think about occupational therapy or your own career? And what uncommon roles, topics, or guests would you like to hear about next? So please follow the podcast, leave me a review, share this episode, and send it to an OT student, practitioner, educator, or colleague who may need a reminder that there are many ways to build a meaningful occupational therapy career. Now here's to 5 years of uncommon conversations, unexpected opportunities, meaningful relationships, and expanding what is possible within occupational therapy. And here's to the next 5 years. Thank you so much for listening. Continue to stay curious, stay connected to your purpose, and never be afraid to create your own uncommon OT path.
And that wraps up another inspiring episode of the Uncommon OT series. Connect with me at www.transitionsot.com. And don't forget to sign up to be part of the Transitions OT community. By doing so, you'll receive my latest compiled list of uncommon OT practice settings, the latest news on mentoring offerings, uncommon OT live events, non-traditional OT resources, and more. You may also follow me on my social media pages on Instagram and LinkedIn. And if you love this episode, head on over to Spotify, Stitcher, Apple, and Google Podcasts to follow, rate, and leave a review. I also ask you to consider pledging your support to my Passion Podcast project by being a patron on Patreon. It is very much appreciated. Sending big OT love. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.